The snow was relentless that New Year's Eve afternoon, tapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Freight Solutions headquarters in downtown Chicago like it knew something ugly was coming. I sat across from Marcus Hale in the corner conference room on the 22nd floor, the one with the fake leather chairs and the view of the frozen river. He was smirking, that confident tilt of his head that said he already owned the room. Cashmere coat draped over the back of his chair. Designer watch catching the light. He slid a folder across the polished table. Hand over the keys. Sophia, he said smoothly, like we were old friends settling a bet. The Nexus engine. All access protocols. Vendor integrations. Everything. It's time for the handover. I looked at him for a long second. Marcus was 38, fresh off a splashy role at an e-commerce giant where he'd disrupted supply chains with flashy apps and investor decks. He'd been at Horizon for 4 months, hired by the board to modernize us. But I had been here 18 years. I built the Nexus routing engine from nothing, a living, breathing network that predicted weather disruptions, optimized fuel across 48 states, layered compliance checks for every federal regulation, insurance trigger, and union rule. It wasn't just software. It was the nervous system that kept refrigerated pharma moving to hospitals, produce from California fields to Midwest tables, and hazmat loads safe through mountain passes. 17 years earlier, during the '08 floods that wiped out half our southern routes, I coded the first fallback sequences on a laptop in a motel room while drivers slept in their cabs. In 2014, when the Midwest polar vortex froze rail lines, my adaptive logic rerouted 87% of loads without missing a single SLA. The board back then understood. Logistics isn't about speed hacks or cloud buzzwords. It's about trust earned in the trenches. But Marcus? He rolled his eyes in meetings when I talked latency thresholds or redundancy mapping. Called the Nexus vintage tech in front of the younger analysts. He wanted shiny vendor dashboards and AI promises that sounded great in PowerPoints but crumbled under real pressure. I had seen the signs 2 months earlier. His assistant forwarded the wrong Slack thread. Nexus phase-out target Q1. Vendor transition confidential. That's when I knew. I didn't panic. I prepared. Years ago, after a vendor breach nearly exposed our dispatch data, I slipped Clause 22C into my employment contract during a quiet contract renewal. Custodial Safeguard Protocol. It tied system ownership logic to my active badge and required dual executive sign-off for any termination affecting core access. Notarized. Escrowed. Buried in the legal vault. If my badge was deactivated without that approval, the Nexus would enter autonomous lockdown, routing intelligence frozen, external mods blocked, waiting for reversal only I could authorize. Marcus didn't know any of that. He never asked about the architecture. He just saw cost savings and his next promotion. I set my badge on the table. The worn plastic rectangle with its faded barcode. It thunked softly. I can't hand it over. Marcus. He blinked. The smirk faltering. Excuse me? It doesn't belong to you, I said quietly. No anger. Just fact. The words hung there in the warm room while outside the snow thickened. He leaned forward, voice dropping to that practiced executive tone. Sophia, this isn't optional. The board approved the transition. We're letting you go effective immediately. Package is generous, severance. Cobra. The works. But the system stays here. I stood up slowly, buttoning my old North Face jacket. The one still smelling faintly of diesel from that 2019 blizzard reroute in Nebraska. I didn't argue or beg. I just nodded once, turned, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind me with finality. In the hallway, the holiday decorations looked ridiculous. Fake tinsel and a half-empty champagne setup waiting for his victory toast. I took the elevator down alone. One long exhale as the floors ticked by. No tears. No texts. Just the quiet knowledge that the pin had been pulled. By the time I reached the lobby, the first subtle shift was already happening deep in the servers. My badge deactivation had triggered Clause 22C. The Nexus didn't crash with fireworks or alarms. It simply began isolating itself layer by layer, routing schemas encrypting, failover nodes withdrawing, compliance engines pausing external queries. It was elegant, merciless. The system I had poured my life into is now protecting itself from the very hands that had just discarded me. I stepped into the snow, hailed a cab, and didn't look back. That night, as fireworks exploded over the lake, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, listening to the distant celebrations. I wondered how long it would take them to notice the first cracks. The first alerts came around 7:45 p.m., just as the fireworks were peaking. A dispatcher in Atlanta messaged the ops channel, Nexus down on regional manifests, ETA, suggestions blank. Then another from Denver, predictive routing engine not responding. Marcus was still in the office, pouring champagne for his small circle of allies. When the calls started flooding the emergency line, they thought it was a glitch at first. Reboots, cache clears, re-authenticating credentials. Nothing. The Nexus routing engine, our golden tool that had made Horizon look prescient during peak seasons, wasn't just offline. It was silent. API calls returned empty responses. No errors. No timeouts, just void. A field supervisor in Ohio tried logging a perishable load to a hospital chain in Cleveland. No route optimization. No vehicle pairing. No compliance clearance. Just a blinking, awaiting protocol validation. Marcus muted the speakerphone mid-toast and laughed it off initially. Ping DevOps, he told his assistant, Lena, a sharp 26-year-old who color-coded everything. But DevOps wasn't on call anymore. I had been the on-call architect for critical incidents. Now the badge was dead, and Clause 22C had severed the primary access chains. By 9:30 p.m., an emergency Zoom was scrambling together. Ops leads from 4 regions. Legal. A couple board observers dialing in bleary-eyed. Refrigerated trucks sat idle on loading docks from Fresno to Pittsburgh. Drivers texted supervisors in frustration. One load of critical vaccines was stuck at a weigh station in Indiana because the insurance verification layer had frozen. A produce distributor in California was already threatening to pull their contract if morning confirmations didn't come through. They tried everything they knew, restoring from the last backup snapshot. Cycling service accounts, even reaching out to the vendor Marcus had lined up for the modernization. The vendor rep sounded confused on the call. We were supposed to inherit clean data exports. This looks like intentional isolation. That's when the first mention of me surfaced. A junior compliance analyst asked the obvious. Who built the core protocols originally? The Zoom went quiet. Marcus cleared his throat. Inherited architecture from the legacy team. But no one bought it. When the system that had run flawlessly for years suddenly refuses to move, people start asking who held the keys. Lena, ever the eager one, dug into the records vault downstairs, the dusty filing cabinets everyone called the archive. She found my laminated binder under contingency protocols. Tab 5, Clause 22C. She scanned it, eyes widening, and forwarded screenshots to the group. The language was plain. Upon custodial role termination without dual executive approval, the Nexus enters escrow lockdown state. All routing, compliance, and adaptive logic modules isolate. Reversal requires custodial reauthorization per notarized triggers. Marcus's face drained of color on camera. He hadn't read my contract deeply. No one had. They assumed the system was company property, a tool anyone could swap out like updating an app. But I had written the logic with foresight, redundancy upon redundancy. Triggers tied to real-world risks like the 2017 cyber incident that almost cost us millions. The Nexus wasn't broken. It was waiting, holding its breath. Midnight came. Fireworks faded. Shipments piled up. 43 outbound loads were in limbo by dawn. Cross-state manifests showed overlapping assignments. One truck in Texas received a route that mathematically looped back on itself. Compliance flags lit up for missing federal transport certifications. A Department of Agriculture contact emailed demanding explanation for why their grain corridor loads were flagged as uninsured. Marcus barked orders. Pull logs. Call every archive node. But the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. The system remembered me. And it had chosen silence over surrender. Tuesday morning hit like a slow-motion avalanche. The phones at Horizon started ringing nonstop by 8 a.m. A pharmaceutical partner in New Jersey flagged cold chain breaches on 3 delayed shipments. A Michigan furniture supplier demanded an immediate audit after their loads were double booked. Then the killer call. The federal AG rep on speaker. Voice ice cold. Why are your vehicles operating without verified insurance coverage on our lanes? Marcus stammered through excuses about temporary transition issues. The rep wasn't impressed. We're initiating review. Federal contracts pause effective immediately pending full audit. Inside the war room, coffee stains, half-eaten takeout, red-eyed staff. The panic was raw. Someone suggested reaching out to me directly. Marcus shut that down fast. She's out. We don't negotiate with holdouts. But Lena had already pulled the full escrow FAQ I left in the binder. Page 2. In clear language, this is not sabotage. This is a design pause. The Nexus protects institutional knowledge and requires acknowledgement of custodial role for restoration. They trace the lockdown timestamp to my exact badge deactivation moment. The realization settled heavy. I hadn't deleted or corrupted anything. I had designed a system that trusted its creator. Firing me without process had triggered self-preservation. By afternoon, the board called an emergency session. Video off. Voices tense. Marcus tried spinning it as legacy complications, blaming my hoarding of knowledge. But someone had the office recording from the firing. My calm voice played. I can't hand it over. It doesn't belong to you. Silence on the line. Then a senior board member. Would she return? No one answered. Asking meant admitting failure on every level. Arrogance. Poor due diligence. Underestimating quiet competence. I spent that day quietly. Cleaned out a few drawers. Walked to the lakefront. Bought a latte. One email arrived from Darren, a regional director I'd weathered crises with. Hypothetical. What does 22C need for reversal? I didn't reply. Not yet. They weren't ready for humility. The damage mounted. Trucks stacked at borders. Third-party vendors backed out citing liability. One driver quit mid-haul in Ohio, posting video of the mess online. Social mentions of Horizon spiked negatively. Wednesday brought ice storms snarling I-80, compounding the routing failures. Nexus capacity was bleeding, down to 60% effective, with core modules sealed. Manifests failed regulatory checks left and right. More federal notices arrived. A major food transport contract was suspended. In the office, employees openly questioned leadership. A dispatcher confronted Marcus. What's the real contingency? He deflected, monitoring closely. Then the attachment hit his inbox. Authorization sequence 22C final. Inside. Escrow enforcement complete. Status locked. Non-reversible without custodial consent. The room froze. Non-reversible. The final safeguard I had built, the point of no return if ignored too long. Marcus stared at the screen. The weight sinking in. The new vendor bailed by noon. Unwilling to inherit the chaos. Drivers resigned. Board observers grew silent. Attempts to hack or bypass failed because the architecture was mine. Modular, condition layered, every packet tied to compliance logic. They tried one last outreach through legal, an offer, reinstatement, bonus, apology. But pride still blocked real humility. By Friday, the fog over Chicago matched the mood. I sat by my window, coffee warm in hand, watching last-mile vans struggle without guidance, inefficient loops, wrong turns, delays everywhere. My phone buzzed. Unknown Midwest number. The voice was strained. Did you really embed that enforcement logic? I chuckled softly, tired but certain. Tell Marcus it wasn't personal. He just never read Clause 22C. The line stayed open a beat longer, then clicked dead. The system had closed its final loop. Access fully retired. I wasn't going back. 18 years of foresight couldn't be begged back in panic. Legacy systems like the Nexus don't demand worship. They demand respect. The people who build them quietly, who anticipate disasters while others chase trends, can't be discarded like outdated code. Horizon would either rebuild from scratch at enormous cost, losing contracts and reputation, or rot in the consequences of arrogance. Either way, the moral lingered like the snow in a world obsessed with disruption and flash. True power often hides in the patient, the prepared, the ones who think 3 crises ahead. Underestimate them, and the machine you thought you controlled will simply stop listening. And once it does, no amount of champagne or bold talk brings it back. The question remains for anyone running a company, when the person who holds the map walks out the door, do you even know what you've lost until the lights go out?